Some marriages are built on love, but there are others that begin with nothing more than a cold wager, a CEO who froze his heart after betrayal, a rebellious girl convinced she had nothing left to lose. 3 months, one contract, two strangers, and a game of destiny. When people lose faith in love, they build walls. But Ethan Lancaster, he built an entire fortress. He was the CEO of Lancaster Group, one of New York's largest real estate empires. At 33, he had once been named the most powerful man under 35 by Forbes. But behind all the glory lay a cold truth. Ethan had locked his heart the day he walked into the apartment he once shared with his fiancée, only to find her in the arms of his own business rival. His trust shattered, and from then on, Ethan viewed every relationship through the lens of contracts and strategy. To him, love was weakness. Compassion meant loss. The charity gala at the Grand Empire Hotel glittered like a golden dream. Violins played classical musics, crystal chandeliers spilled light onto champagne glasses and gowns that shimmered with sequins. Ethan stood in the corner, whiskey in hand, his gaze as sharp and impenetrable as bulletproof glass. He never cared for these events, but he still attended for influence, for profitable handshakes, and for the presence of Jordan Reese, his best friend and the second largest shareholder of Lancaster Group. Jordan took a sip of his drink, arching a brow. "Are you planning to stand there like a statue all night? You look more like a bodyguard than the head of a corporation." Ethan didn't answer. His eyes had been drawn across the ballroom to a girl who entered as if the entire room had lost its center of gravity. Her caramel brown hair fell in soft curls, her wine-red dress hugged every daring curve, and her smile paid no heed to anyone's judgment. "Cassidy Monroe," Jordan murmured, smirking. "The most beautiful disaster in this city." Ethan raised a brow. "What is she?" "A model A B-list actress." "No, she's the illegitimate daughter of the famous film producer, Mason Monroe, a rebellious spirit trapped in a gilded cage. Dropped out of college, wandered into show business, and became notorious for shattering every so-called moral code." Ethan glanced at her once, then turned away. "Nothing I haven't seen before." Jordan chuckled, lowering his voice like he was laying out a strategic strike. "Then I bet you this 3 months. If you can turn her into a proper lady, no scandals, no trouble, I'll give you $2 million. Ethan let out a dry laugh, raising his glass, as if to toast madness. "You think I have time to rehabilitate people?" "You restructured an entire Asian financial system in 6 weeks," Ethan Jordan pressed. "She'll be easier than that." Ethan looked back at Cassidy. In that moment, her eyes met his. And unlike other women, she didn't look away, shyly didn't invite him in, didn't guard herself. She simply smirked a proud, mocking smile. That look made Ethan pause for half a second, a rarity. "Deal," he said, and the game began. The following night, Cassidy lay sprawled across a velvet chaise, idly swirling a martini glass, when her stepfather's voice came through the phone like a sealed contract. "My dear girl, Mr. Jonathan Wexley has agreed to the engagement," he announced. 2 weeks from now, you will fulfill your duty." "He's 30 years older than me," Cassidy bit out, "and he used to beat his ex-wife. And he just invested $50 million into my studio. Don't ruin this deal, Cassidy." She hung up. No tears. She was far too used to her feelings having no place in her family's transactions. But this time, she wouldn't accept it. 3 days after the gala, Ethan Lancaster walked into the 47th floor conference room of Lancaster Tower, where his secretary had informed him of a private appointment under a surprisingly familiar name, Cassidy Monroe. When he opened the door, she was already there, calm, confident, dressed in a tailored olive green suit, her hair pulled high, her dark eyes gleaming under long lashes. She didn't look like the wild girl from tabloids. She looked like a woman holding leverage. "You wanted to see me?" Ethan's voice was quiet as he entered and closed the door. Cassidy set her coffee cup down, lips curving into a faint smile. "I hear you're in need of a test subject." Ethan froze mid-step. "Who told you?" "Rumors travel fast," she replied evenly, "especially when your friend Jordan isn't careful with his tongue after 3 martinis. Ethan said nothing, recalling Jordan's careless laughter with a group of models. Cassidy must have been close enough to hear. She tilted her head. "I know about your bet. 3 months to turn a social disaster like me into a symbol of refinement." Her smile wasn't angry, just tinged with the weariness of someone too used to judgment. "I used to find that insulting," she continued, eyes sharpening. "But now I think Maybe it's an opportunity. Ethan sat down silently studying her. My stepfather has arranged my marriage, Cassidy said. To an old man with power and 3 ex-wives. If I want to escape, I need a name strong enough to keep him from ever touching me again. She lifted her chin, her voice like steel. You need to win a bet. I need freedom. We help each other. Ethan folded his arms, his gaze no longer cold but assessing. Don't you think this is too dangerous? Cassidy gave a small laugh. Compared to being forced to marry a sick old man, at least you look ethical. We'll need a contract, Ethan said, his voice dropping lower. And a clause that lets me vanish without a trace after 3 months, she added. No one explains, no one asks. Ethan nodded, his eyes resting on her defiant face. You realize, he said slowly, once you step onto this chessboard, neither of us will be outsiders anymore. Cassidy leaned forward on the table, her eyes flashing with challenge. I've been a pawn in someone else's game for half my life, Ethan. This is the first time I get to choose the board I play on. They locked eyes like rival chess masters making the opening move. One seeking freedom, one seeking to prove himself. Neither imagined that feelings would become the most dangerous piece on the board. The wedding of Ethan Lancaster and Cassidy Monroe quickly became the hottest headline in tabloids across America. No one believed it was love. Everyone thought it was just another high society spectacle, a cold-blooded billionaire and a rebellious girl with too much notoriety and too little seriousness. What could they possibly create except a flawless performance? The ceremony took place at Lancaster Estates, a stately lakeside mansion in the Connecticut countryside. Everything was beautiful in a chilling, distant way. An archway draped in white flowers, violins playing classical tunes, guests in tuxedos and designer gowns. Yet, beneath the dazzling light, there was no warmth. Cassidy wore a mermaid-cut gown, tailored by a haute couture designer. Her brown hair was pinned in a soft bun, baring her delicate shoulders. She looked mesmerizing and just as cold. Her eyes as she walked down the aisle carried no shyness, only defiance. Ethan stood at the altar adjusting his black bow tie. His face might as well have been sculpted from marble, cold, stoic, impossible to read. The minister's voice echoed like lines from a script at a play with no emotion. Ethan Lancaster, do you take Cassidy Monroe to be your wife, to love, cherish, and care for her? Und, in baum de boin wand. I do, Ethan replied without hesitation. Cassidy Monroe, do you take Ethan Lancaster to be your husband, to respect and stand by him? A faint smile curved Cassidy's lips. I do. Her voice carried like recited dialogue, not bitter, not tender. There was no kiss, no tender embrace, just a nod and a silent slide of a costly ring onto Cassidy's finger. The reception unfolded as a display of extravagance. Ethan submerged himself in conversations with business partners, while Cassidy, surrounded by curious stares, lifted her champagne glass and smiled perfunctorily. Once she had dreamed of her wedding, of being loved, of a family. But now she was a bride without love, a role, a contract. Their wedding night inside the Lancaster estate carried neither the scent of roses nor the sweetness of honey. Only silence, heavy suffocating silence filled the room. Cassidy stood by the tall window, the golden glow of lamps casting her silhouette against the glass. The lake in the distance lay still as an untouched mirror. Her hair flowed down her back, the white silk of her nightgown falling gracefully along her slim frame, baring shoulders as fragile as brush strokes on rice paper. She was silent and waiting. Ethan entered after a soft knock, still in his black tuxedo tie, undone collar unbuttoned. His eyes weighed something, not desire, but calculation. We should start the performance tonight, shouldn't we? His deep voice carried a challenge. Cassidy didn't turn her eyes fixed on the lake. How long does this play last? She asked flatly. 3 months. 3 months. Ethan stepped closer, long enough for a game. Cassidy turned to face him. Her expression was still, her gaze sharp as tempered glass. Do you think I'm such an easy piece to read? He didn't answer. He stepped nearer, his eyes locking with hers, his hand lifted, brushing her cheek, polite, restrained, more like testing power than caressing. She didn't flinch, but she didn't soften either. Her eyes met his, cold a warning. What do you know about me? Cassidy asked quietly. Ethan remained silent. His gaze held caution and curiosity. You think I'm some tabloid creation? She pressed on, a doll living off scandal and smirks. She stepped back, keeping distance, her chin lifted, both defiant and wounded. Then you're no different from the rest of them. Ethan's brow furrowed. You know, Cassidy's voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from finally speaking aloud. What she had hidden all her life: I've never slept with anyone. The room froze, as though Ethan had misheard. Cassidy drew a deep breath, stepping closer to him, slow but steady. Not because I'm virtuous, but because I've never met anyone worthy of seeing the real me. Ethan faltered. Every photo from wild parties, every scandalous headline, every man's hungry gaze, all dissolved in that one simple confession. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Not out of shock, but because the entire framework he had lived by had just been overturned. Cassidy was no wild card to tame. She was a mystery too deep for him to even claim he had the right to solve. Cassidy turned, her voice dropping. You think you're controlling this game, but the truth is, you never even understood the board you stepped onto. She walked toward the door, the light casting a pale halo across her back. Don't pretend to be my husband, Ethan. If you're just here to win a bet, then I am not the prize. The door closed behind her, soft yet echoing long after. Ethan stood alone, no longer confident, no longer in control. For the first time, the man who thought he could control everything realized he had played the wrong move from the very beginning. The first morning after their wedding night, Ethan awoke in a silence so profound he could hear the ticking of the clock. Cassidy was gone. No note, no polite congratulatory words, not even the faintest glance to suggest she still acknowledged their performance. Only a small indentation on the leather chair by the window, the place where she had sat for hours staring out at the lake, as if trying to keep herself from unraveling. Ethan walked toward it, slowly, hands in his pockets, and for the first time in years. He admitted to himself that he did not understand this woman. He couldn't control her, couldn't measure her, couldn't define her. The following days, Cassidy seemed to slip back into her old image: late breakfasts, endless nights out, neon lights, strong liquor, smirking lips, and the echo of high heels down the marble halls of Lancaster Estate when she returned near dawn. The media wasted no time. Lancaster's new bride, seen with 3 different men in under a week. Ethan read the headlines in silence. He wasn't angry. He didn't accuse her. He simply observed, because now he wasn't sure that what the world saw was the truth. Every time she appeared at dinner, hair-tousled eyes, a little red, clad in a black dress that clung like armor, Ethan saw not a reckless socialite, but a warrior walking onto a battlefield. And then one night, he stumbled upon her in the greenhouse, curled up among wilting roses left untended. In her hand was an unlit cigarette, her fingers trembling slightly, not with indulgence, but with resistance. Ethan stood a few steps away, silent. For the first time, he saw that behind the designer gowns and crimson lips, Cassidy was just a girl fighting not to shatter. He began to notice more, not because of suspicion, but because something about Cassidy simply didn't align with the image he'd painted. She never tried to be sweet. She addressed the staff, curtly moved through the mansion, as though it were a stage, and she was the star who needed no audience. But then one night at 1 a.m, Ethan went to the kitchen for water, and found her quietly folding a tiny pair of socks, slipping them into an envelope along with a stack of large bills. She thought no one was watching. She sealed it, scrawled across the front in messy handwriting, "Don't ask who. Just let the girl stay in school." Then she left it on the table and walked away as if doing something kind was something shameful. The next morning, Ethan caught sight of her in the laundry room, folding handkerchiefs for the servants' people, who were invisible in the schedules of Lancaster Estate. "Got bored, so I did it," she said, before he could ask, her voice casual, not defensive, not warm either. Ethan didn't smile, didn't press further, but something inside him tightened. He had thought she rebelled out of spite, but now he realized Cassidy rebelled to survive. When the world treated her as a spectacle, the only power she had left was to make sure no one dared come too close. And then one stormy night, heavy rain hammered the roof while Ethan was reading in the library. Music drifted in jazz notes playing from the patio speakers. He stepped outside. Cassidy was standing in the downpour, arms spread wide, head tilted to the sky. Rain soaked her nightdress until it clung to her skin, but she didn't care. "Are you trying to catch pneumonia?" he asked from the steps. Cassidy turned, smiling faintly. "I used to think if I got wet enough, maybe the pain inside me would wash away." Ethan said nothing. She walked toward him barefoot on the cold stone. "When I was little, whenever I cried, my mother told me, 'Cass, if you must cry, cry in the rain. That way, no one will see you weak.'" She lifted her eyes to his. She's gone now, and I don't need anyone to see anymore. Ethan stepped down one stair, then draped his suit jacket over her shoulders, without a word. Cassidy stilled for a second, then let out a soft laugh. You really don't know how to act like a loving husband, do you? Ethan looked at her for the first time, without sarcasm or analysis. Just a man, realizing he'd been wrong. Maybe I shouldn't act, he said quietly, firmly. Maybe I should learn to see you clearly, instead of just through the mask others built around you. Cassidy pulled the jacket tighter, eyes shifting away. A raindrop slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't clear whether it came from the sky or from inside her. From that night, things began to change. Not into a real marriage, but into something where neither kept their armor quite as heavy. Dinner conversations gained a few questions like, "Where did you go today?" And Cassidy answered with lines like, "Nowhere important." They didn't fight, but they didn't fake affection either. Between them hung a fragile air named temporary trust. Ethan began to understand. Cassidy didn't need anyone to save her. She just needed someone to see her, truly see her. And Cassidy still smirking, still sneaking out at night, still living as if consequences didn't matter. Nevertheless, each time she returned, she paused outside the library for a moment. The light on Ethan's desk was always still on. What once seemed like a simple game Ethan was destined to win had become a labyrinth with no escape. Because somewhere along the way, he had stopped counting the days left in their contract and started counting the moments his heart skipped because of the woman he had once called a bet. Cassidy didn't know when it started, but Ethan's footsteps no longer made her uneasy. Before, whenever he appeared anywhere in the house, the air seemed to thicken. He was like a Greek god misplaced in the 21st century, cold, logical, too perfect to have emotions. But now each time he walked past, she felt her awareness sharpen, not out of fear, but because he had begun to look at her as a person, without judgment, without distortion. And that made her hesitate. Dinner had once been a silent battlefield. Two people sitting opposite each other, the clinking of silverware, the only sound in the room. But tonight, Ethan looked up, breaking the silence with a simple question. "What kind of sketch paper do you like to use?" Cassidy paused. "How do you know I draw?" "Because I saw your sketches on the desk, and the damp coat you left in the greenhouse that rainy night. You draped it over a half-finished drawing as if you cared more about the sketch smudging than about yourself being soaked." She raised a brow. "Do you always scrutinize women like this?" "No," Ethan answered. "With most people, I don't need to look that closely. With you, the more I look, the less I know." Cassidy gave a dry laugh, but not a mocking one. "Maybe ignorance is safer, Ethan. People prefer to see me through photos, through gossip. It's easier to swallow that way. But it's wrong. So, what you want to fix my image now?" Ethan met her eyes. His gaze no longer held challenge, but something like confession. "I don't know if I understand enough to fix anything, but I want to stop guessing." For the first time, Cassidy didn't shoot back with a sharp remark. She just looked at him as if weighing whether she could afford to lower her guard. One weekend afternoon, Cassidy sat on the back porch sketching Lancaster Lake under the glow of sunset. For the first time in years, her hand didn't tremble while holding a pencil. Ethan approached carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "May I see it?" She didn't turn. "No, because it's unfinished. Because I never share anything unless I'm sure it's beautiful." A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "That makes me want to see it even more." Cassidy turned, studying him for a few seconds. "The problem isn't whether the drawing is beautiful. The problem is, if you say it isn't, I'll believe you. And I'd hate that." Ethan set the tea down beside her. "Then wait until you're ready." He didn't touch the sketch, didn't try to peek. He sat one step below her, one hand on his knee gazing out at the lake. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on him no longer guarded. One night, rain came without warning. Ethan and Cassidy were caught in the back garden during one of their rare evening walks, moments when they didn't need to talk, yet still walked side by side, like 2 streams running parallel. They ducked under the moss-covered eaves of an old wooden shelter. Rain poured from the roof, falling straight into the narrow gap between them, like a fragile boundary neither dared cross. Cassidy tilted her head back, letting the raindrops run down her cheeks as though testing if they could wash anything away. After a long silence, she suddenly asked, still facing the rain, "Do you ever feel afraid?" Ethan glanced at her. "Afraid of what?" She hesitated a moment, then softly, "Afraid that I'll never become the woman you thought you could tame in 3 months." Ethan looked at her directly. His eyes weren't cold anymore, only honest. "Cassidy, I stopped thinking about that bet a long time ago." She let out a short, dry laugh. Men only say that when they realize they were wrong, but don't know how to start apologizing. Ethan's reply was low-stripped of his usual defenses. And women laugh like that when they're not sure if they even deserve forgiveness, even when no one has blamed them yet. Cassidy turned toward him. Their eyes met for a few seconds of silence. No hatred, no suspicion. Just something unspoken like, "I see you, and you're starting to see me." Neither said another word, but for the first time their silence wasn't heavy. For the first time they stood together without armor, without second-guessing, without forcing words to fill the emptiness. And in the steady rhythm of the falling rain, something nameless began to grow quietly but irreversibly. Evenings at Lancaster Estate gradually became breathable. Cassidy didn't give up her habit of going out late, but Ethan no longer tried to stop her. He knew control wouldn't keep her safe. Only patience would let her lower her armor on her own. And she knew the man sharing her roof no longer sought to change her. He was learning to wait. They were still two different worlds, but between them, cracks had begun to form. And sometimes it's through the cracks that light finds its way in. Loving someone is hard, but believing you are loved, that is even harder. Though life at Lancaster Estate had grown gentler, Cassidy still felt something unsettled. Amid Ethan's thoughtful glances and the soft silences, a seed of doubt quietly sprouted in her heart. It began with the nights Ethan didn't come home. "I have an urgent meeting in Boston. Tonight I must see an investor. I'll be late, don't wait up." At first she believed him, but his absences grew too frequent, too precise, especially after the charity gala she had organized, the one where Ethan had promised to attend, but never showed. One Saturday afternoon, golden light slanted through the tall windows of the Lancaster living room. Cassidy sat by the window, a teacup long gone cold in her hand, holding on as though its phantom warmth might steady her. The door opened softly. Heels clicked across the marble, confident, uninvited, unmistakable. "My darling girl" came, the honeyed, icy voice. Cassidy didn't need to turn. She knew. Margot. The woman entered with a slim figure, platinum curls, lips the color of aged wine, and eyes sharp as a hidden blade. She set a Hermes bag on the tea table, moving as if the house belonged to her. "I've brought you a gift." Cassidy raised an eyebrow lazily. "What is it this time?" "Another dress receipt. A coupon for therapy." Margot smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "No, sweetheart. This one can't be bought. It's the truth." She pulled a thick envelope from her bag, clasped with a gold clip, and slid it across the table like a philanthropist bestowing charity. Cassidy sighed, flipping it open carelessly until her eyes froze on the first photograph. Her hand stiffened. In the photo sat Ethan, his familiar composed face lit by the glow of a fine restaurant. Across from him, Isabel Green. Her golden hair gleamed under amber light, her eyes soft and shining, her hand resting on Ethan's wrist lightly, but with the ease of intimacy. Cassidy flipped through more photos. Each angle different, yet all spoke the same language: closeness, familiarity. Enough to wound. Her grip tightened on the edges. "When was this?" Her voice rasped. "Last week," Margot said, shrugging smug. Cassidy placed the photos down carefully, as if afraid to break something already cracked. "Don't blame me," Margot cooed. "I just thought you deserved to know the game you're in. Don't be so naive as to think you're the chosen one. Ethan has never played without thinking of the prize." Cassidy quietly gathered the photos, stacking them neatly as if folding away a dress she would never wear again. Then she stood. The scrape of her heel against marble was soft, but Margot's hand gripped her purse tighter. Cassidy's eyes were no longer clouded. They were as cold and clear as morning water. "You came here because you're afraid," Cassidy said evenly. Margot blinked. "Afraid." "Afraid that if I'm strong enough to stay, your old schemes will collapse. Afraid that if Ethan truly needs me, then your family will have nothing left but financial bargaining chips." Silence, only the tick of a clock. Then Cassidy bowed her head politely like a lady dismissing a guest. "You may leave now." Margot faltered, then laughed proud, cruel. "Be careful with hope, Cassidy. It has a habit of stabbing those who've already lost faith." Cassidy didn't answer. She stood tall, her eyes calm, as though every blade in the world had already cut her once, and none could cut deep again. Margot left. When the door closed, Cassidy's hands unclenched, nails marked deep into her palms. And once again she found herself in a beautiful room, with a heart blurred by what she thought was real. That night, Cassidy sat alone in the art studio she had built from an old storage room. She didn't cry, only sipped red wine until the glass was empty, her breaths heavy. She remembered all they had shared, the way Ethan looked at her as if she were the only one, the accidental touches that carried a strange warmth, the evenings he knelt to tie her shoelaces, the moments he slipped allergy pills into her lemonade when she sneezed. So it was all performance. She had let herself believe he saw her, that he cared for her true self, not the infamous Cassidy Monroe. A bitter laugh escaped, half hurt, half mocking. She should have known better. Don't trust, don't love. Meanwhile, at the 52nd floor of Lancaster Group in Manhattan, Ethan sat in a darkened boardroom, the glow of financial forecasts bleeding red across the screen, numbers that bled him dry. 3 sleepless nights, 3 days without answers. His personal fortune nearly mortgaged away, investors fleeing. The community housing project, the only venture Ethan ever wanted for reasons beyond profit, teetered on collapse. And the one pushing him to the brink was Isabel Green. Beautiful, ruthless, once his lover and partner. The woman who had made him believe in love until the day she sold their shares to a rival behind his back. Now she had returned right when Lancaster Group was starved for capital, bringing a velvet-wrapped dagger of an offer. Ethan. Isabel's voice was soft, her eyes shimmering with half-true emotion. I can save your company. I've secured Swiss investors. But she leaned closer, slow, only if you end things with Cassidy Monroe permanently. Ethan's grip on his chair tightened. Why? Isabel smiled. Simple. She ruins your image, weakens this company with scandal, softens your heart. Her voice dropped. And because I don't share what was once mine, not with a reckless little rebel who survives on drama. If you still choose her, then I won't choose you. Silence swallowed the room. Ethan stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. He didn't look back. Isabel sat alone, sipping her wine, not angry, not regretful, just waiting for Ethan to realize that choosing love would cost more than he could bear. Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe in Soho, Cassidy sat in disguise, a gray knit cap, a silk scarf shielding her face. She hadn't planned to go anywhere. She just needed a place beyond Lancaster's perfect walls and perfect stairs. All day she had drowned in doubt, haunted by Margot's photos. Her mind told her to leave, but her heart wouldn't let her. And then she overheard whispers from the next table, clear enough to cut through the jazz playing overhead. If the funds don't come in next week, we lose the whole project. Lancaster has mortgaged nearly everything he owns. He hasn't slept for 3 nights. Oh, still no investors. He's about to lose it all. Cassidy froze, every word not a dagger but a needle piercing her doubt. He hadn't been distant because of her. He hadn't stayed away for Isabel. He had been fighting, alone, silently, and perhaps to spare her from being dragged in. She sat motionless, latte, cooling in her hands. And for the first time in years, Cassidy realized she had been wrong. Not wrong about the man. Wrong about the timing of her doubts. She didn't run to him. Didn't call, didn't cry on the street like in some movie. She just sat there, eyes closed, and whispered to herself, not to Ethan, but to her own heart. If he won't say it, then this time I'll stand for him. Cassidy returned home late. No alcohol, no photographs. Nothing could obscure the truth now she had been wrong. She remembered Ethan's weary eyes the nights he fell asleep on the library sofa, shoulders burdened not with disgust for her, but with the weight of an empire. In silence, she unlocked her office, pulled out a small key hidden for 7 years, and opened the safe. Inside lay her mother's inheritance untouched all this time, her last sanctuary of memory. She opened her laptop, called her lawyer. Transfer everything from the Monroe Trust to Lancaster Group. Anonymous, under the name E. Monroe Foundation. No recognition. No one, not even my husband, must know. Are you certain, Ms. Cassidy? She smiled faintly, voice steady. For the first time in my life, I am. That night, Ethan came home late. Cassidy was already in bed, or so he thought. Passing the library, he noticed the art room light still glowing. He hesitated but kept walking. Too tired. Inside, Cassidy was writing a new journal entry. I have loved, and for the first time I don't regret it, even if he doesn't love me. At least I once loved someone with all my courage. The next morning, New York awoke sluggishly. Even the sun seemed hesitant, its light dimmer, as it filtered through the glass walls of Lancaster Group's headquarters. But Ethan was the one truly drowning in darkness, his mind entangled in numbers. financial reports, and endless rejections from potential investors. He stood motionless at the window, coffee cooling in his grip. A ding from his computer broke the silence. A new financial update. He opened it without expectation and then froze. Project account funds received. Amount transferred $18.7 million. Origin E. Monroe Foundation. Ethan went rigid. The cup slipped from his hand, coffee spilling across papers, but he didn't notice. Monroe. His eyes locked on the screen, unblinking. His heart pounded, then clenched hard in his chest. Cassidy. No one else bore that name. No one else had reason to hide behind anonymity for such a gift. He lowered the cup too slack-fingered to stop the spill. He didn't care. She was the one behind it all. He closed his eyes, forcing reason into his thoughts. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe another foundation. Maybe a random benefactor. But his heart already knew. And yet he dared not believe, dared not speak it aloud. Because if it truly was her, then he had been blind to a love so selfless it felt cruel not to see it sooner. Meanwhile, at Lancaster Estate, Cassidy sat alone in her art room. Afternoon light poured through the windows, glinting off the unfinished sketch of a house standing against a cold city skyline. She had moved all of her inheritance into that anonymous fund, signed, sealed, no credit. And she had chosen silence. Not out of fear Ethan would scold her, not out of some desire to be glorified as selfless, but because deep down, what she feared most wasn't rejection, it was being loved out of obligation. Cassidy had been a pawn before in a marriage contract and society's gossip in her family's transactions. She couldn't bear the thought that Ethan's tenderness might come not from love, but from gratitude. She feared hearing "I need you" when what he meant was, "because you saved me." Her pride forged through years of judgment from the press, and even her own kin wouldn't allow her to accept a love with conditions, even if the condition was her own sacrifice. So Cassidy kept it buried, hidden like a half-finished sketch, too vulnerable to be seen. Not yet ready, not even by the one it was meant for. Still, hope stirred quietly in her chest. A fragile part of her wished Ethan might sense it, that he might notice she didn't need to shout to be heard, that he might choose her even without knowing what she had done for him. She wanted to know when the money, the responsibilities, the contracts all fell away, would Ethan still need her? Not as a wife by agreement, not as a symbol, but as a woman, fractured, fierce, complicated, yet achingly real. And just as this fragile hope began to settle inside her, soft as a lake after wind fate merciless as ever struck again. Not with rejection, not with betrayal, but with a blow so violent it threatened to silence everything forever. That evening, after attending a charity event, Cassidy drove back to Lancaster Estate alone. On the quiet country highway, a black SUV followed her headlights off. As she curved around a steep bend near the forest, the SUV suddenly accelerated. A sharp swerve, a screeching collision. Cassidy caught only a flash of headlights in her rearview mirror before the world spun. The deafening crash sent her car skidding off the road, flipping sideways, slamming against the steel barrier. News reached Ethan at 2 a.m. He stormed into the hospital, in his sleepwear hair disheveled heart pounding with dread. Through the ICU glass, he saw her. Cassidy lay pale, blood-dried on her temple, her arm suspended in a sling. The doctor's words were clinical daggers. She suffered a mild brain injury, significant blood loss, and is currently in a temporary coma. Ethan sank into the chair beside her bed, gripping her hand. That hand, once cold, once defiant, now lay limp, fragile as a broken melody. "Cass," he whispered, voice cracking. "Don't you dare sleep like this. Not when I just realized you're the only one who's never left me." He didn't cry, but his eyes blurred heavier than any tears. The next morning, as Ethan prepared to leave the hospital, George appeared at the door, troubled, holding a thin folder. "What is it?" Ethan rasped, voice hoarse after a sleepless night by Cassidy's side. George hesitated, then placed the file on the table. The bank sent confirmation of the project funds, but the auditors flagged a secondary record backed by a personal account. Ethan flipped it open. The first page, receipt of the transfer. The second, a handwritten note. "Please keep the donor anonymous. No recognition required." The script. He recognized it instantly, on last year's birthday card, on notes Cassidy had left for the chef, on sketches she'd tucked away. He turned the page. Signature Cassidy Monroe. No doubt, no speculation. A dizzying wave hit him. The file slipped from his hand onto the table. She knew, she understood, she saw everything. And she had loved him in a way no one ever had, without proof, without acknowledgement, without holding anything back for herself. Ethan buried his head in his hands, emotions flooding. Not because of the company, not because of debt, but because for the first time, he understood what it meant to be loved and still be free. And he had almost missed it. By the third day after the crash, Cassidy remained unresponsive. Fear grew that she might never wake. Ethan never left her room. He refused meetings, investors, everything. Instead, he read her leather-bound journal found in her studio. Each page revealed a hidden world. He isn't perfect. He's too quiet, too cold. But in those gaps, I see my own reflection. I hate that I love him, and I can't stop. Ethan closed the journal, laying it gently against her chest. His hands trembled. "Cass, please, you have to open your eyes." His voice broke. "I'd give up everything if you just look at me once more." And then her fingers twitched. No one noticed except Ethan. His eyes widened, his chest seized. She just moved. Before anyone arrived, Cassidy's eyelids fluttered open, slow weak, as if each shaft of light cut her. But she saw him and whispered, "You stayed." Ethan nodded, tears falling onto her hand. "I never left, and I never will again." In the days that followed, the hospital became Ethan Lancaster's second home. Every morning he brought a cup of hot cocoa, Cassidy's favorite. He sat by her bed reading aloud passages from random books, sometimes from Pride and Prejudice, the one she once called old-fashioned but irresistibly romantic. Cassidy slowly regained strength. Though her body was frail, the light in her eyes returned. One morning after a long sleep, she awoke to find Ethan gently folding the blanket at the foot of her bed, each movement slow, careful as if he were gathering back everything she had ever lost. He sat down, took her hand, and pressed it against his cheek, like a man clutching the only thing left in the ruins. Cassidy gazed into his eyes for the first time since the accident, and she knew something had changed in him. His silence was no longer cold. It was soft, sad, honest. She whispered, "Don't you—" Ethan didn't answer. He only tightened his hold on her hand, a silent confirmation, heavy as stone. "I know," he finally murmured, "and I can't stop blaming myself." A faint smile touched her pale lips, her eyes damp. "I don't need your gratitude, Ethan. I'm not grateful," his voice cracked. "I'm hurting, because you love me so much, and all I gave you was suspicion, distance, and silence." Cassidy turned her face toward the window. Outside, dawn painted a silver sheen across the gray clouds, beautiful but fragile. "I was going to leave you," she confessed softly. "After I saw those pictures with Isabel, I truly thought you never chose me." Ethan bowed his head, clutching her hand tighter. "I didn't choose you when you needed me most. That was the greatest mistake of my life." He paused, then raised his head eyes steely. "And Isabel? That wasn't just a misunderstanding." Cassidy looked back at him. "What do you mean?" Ethan met her gaze, voice steady, each word sharp, as if carved from stone. "She was behind the accident. We have proof. Highway cameras caught the SUV rented under Isabel's parent company, driven by one of her men. He confessed he was paid to stage a small accident to ruin the image of the woman by Ethan Lancaster's side." Cassidy froze. Ethan continued, his voice heavy with fury and regret. "She couldn't stand that my company survived without her. And she couldn't accept that the woman who once was a bet had become the only reason I'd give up power." Cassidy's grip tightened around his hand. For the first time, she reached for him. "How did you find out?" "My instincts. And guilt. I hired independent investigators after I saw the brake marks and realized the crash wasn't random. They traced everything: the rental, the GPS logs, the shadow accounts Isabel used to pay for it. She wanted me dead," Cassidy whispered. Her tone wasn't afraid, only wounded. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes said enough. A thick silence hung between them. Finally, Cassidy spoke, voice barely audible. "I thought I was the only one who was lonely, but it turns out you were too." Ethan buried his face in her hand. No longer the proud CEO, no longer the man always 3 steps ahead. Just a man terrified of losing the only thing that mattered after waiting too long to admit it. 3 days later, Ethan arrived at Isabel Green's hotel with his lawyers and the police. She was sipping espresso under warm, golden lights when the officers appeared behind her. "Isabel Green, you are under arrest for attempted murder, assault, and obstruction of business operations." The cup slipped from her hand, shattering into shards. Ethan stepped forward, eyes cold as ice. You thought you could touch the woman I love and escape the price. Isabel recoiled, but the steel cuffs snapped shut. You're making a mistake, Ethan, she shouted, thrashing. No, Ethan said, gaze unwavering. The only mistake I ever made was once loving someone like you. After Isabel's arrest, transparency swept through Lancaster Group. Shareholders' trust rebounded. The community housing project was revived. And for the first time, Ethan realized no success held meaning without the woman who had saved it all. Cassidy was discharged 2 weeks later. She moved slowly, her arm still bandaged, but her eyes burned bright again. Ethan arranged for a small house in Connecticut by the lake, not to isolate her, but so they could begin anew. One evening, Cassidy sat on the porch, sketching the lake glowing in sunset. Ethan stepped out holding a thick envelope. This is for you. Cassidy opened it and froze. It was the deed transferring 25% of the community project shares into her name, Cassidy Monroe Lancaster. What are you doing? She whispered. Ethan sat beside her. I'm giving back what you built. This project isn't only mine, it belongs to the one who saved it. I don't need this, Cassidy said softly, her heart swelling. All I ever wanted was to be loved. Ethan finished, his eyes gentle. She bit her lip, then nodded. Ethan reached out, brushing her cheek tenderly. I don't know how to write poetry. I don't even know how to say I love you the right way. But I can prove every day that I'm no longer the man who froze his heart. Cassidy looked at him in silence. A breeze lifted her sketch, blowing it to the ground. But Ethan didn't notice. He only looked at her, the woman who had broken his defenses and rebuilt his soul. I once bet on you, Cassidy, he said, voice low. But in the end, you were the one who made me win against myself. Tears slid down Cassidy's face as she smiled. Then don't ever gamble again. Just choose. Ethan nodded, solemn, as if signing the most important contract of his life. I choose you. Every day. Every moment. 3 months. The length of the marriage contract had come to an end. Cassidy once thought that when this day arrived, she would walk away with a victorious smile, a generous payout, and a peaceful heart untouched by love. But now none of that mattered. The only thing she wanted was one thing alone, and Ethan knew exactly what it was. That evening, there were no reporters, no guests, no flowers, no $1,000,000 rings. Only a cobblestone path leading from their lake house to the back garden, the same place where Cassidy had painted her first sketches after the accident. Ethan held her hand as they walked silent, each step aligned with the rhythm of their hearts. When they reached the garden center, tiny lights flickered on along the fence, wrapping them in a soft, glowing circle. On the stone table lay a small red velvet box. Beside it, a half-burned piece of paper, the old contract. Cassidy stopped short. Ethan turned to her, his dark eyes glistening in the night. I once proposed to you because of a bet, he began, his voice low but steady. The most foolish decision of my life. Cassidy stood silent, her heart hammering. At the time, I thought I could control everything, even you. But you aren't a woman who can be controlled. You're a storm. And the only place I've ever found peace. He opened the velvet box. Inside was a new ring, simple, pure platinum. No diamonds, no excess. Cassidy Monroe. Ethan sank to one knee, his voice trembling. Can you forgive a fool who thought he was stronger than love? And if you can, will you marry me again this time? Not for a contract, but because we belong to each other. Cassidy's eyes blurred with tears. She didn't need time to think. She knelt before him, clasping his hands. I do. I choose you, this time forever. Ethan smiled, tears streaming down his face. He slipped the ring onto her finger. There was no passionate kiss, no dramatic music. Only an embrace in the night, tight, unyielding, where two once strangers had finally found a home in each other. Months later, Cassidy stood on stage at the opening ceremony of a women's empowerment center, a project she had founded with part of her inheritance. She wore a simple white dress, elegant without sparkle. Her hair fell loosely, her face radiant, yet matured. From the audience, Ethan watched with pride shining in his eyes. Cassidy held the microphone, her voice warm and steady. I was once a girl who thought rebellion was the only way to exist. I trusted no one, least of all love. But someone saw in me what I couldn't see in myself. And because of him, I finally became wholly me. Her gaze fell to the crowd, where Ethan leaned casually against a column, hands in his pockets, eyes tender and unbroken from hers. He isn't perfect, and I am too complicated. But in this world, sometimes two imperfect people choosing to fight for each other is enough to begin something miraculous. The hall erupted in applause. That night in the garden behind their lake house, the place where it had all begun, Ethan sat on a bench, his arm wrapped around Cassidy's shoulders. Do you believe he whispered that, even without that bet, I still would have loved you? Cassidy rested her head against his chest, smiling faintly. Maybe. Just maybe. Yes, but there's one thing I'm certain of. What's that? I'm certain. I would love you again, whether it was the first time or the 1,000th. A breeze rustled the trees. The moon cast silver across the still lake. And under the star-filled sky, there were no more bets. Only 2 people, 2 hearts, and 1 promise not out of condition, not out of logic. Simply because love was finally worth believing in. Love doesn't always arrive with sweeping ballads or grand gestures. It can begin with a selfish bet, a cold contract, or a chess game both players thought they controlled. But with time, true love finds its own path. It weaves itself through quiet meals, silent glances, moments of sheltering rain, and sacrifices made without recognition. Ethan and Cassidy's story is no fairy tale, no Cinderella, no prince. It is the story of 2 broken souls learning to shed their armor, to trust again, to forgive, and above all, to choose each other every day. Because love is not just a fleeting feeling. It is a decision repeated even through hurt, doubt, and darkness. If you're waiting for perfect love, you may wait forever. But if you dare to step towards someone with patient sincerity and a heart unafraid, love will come to you in ways you never imagined. Just like it did for Cassidy and Ethan. Their love began as a wager, but ended as the most precious gift life could give, a true home for 2 once broken hearts. Thank you for joining their journey, and remember, perhaps you too are living a story worth telling.